Video games are often complex tales of interesting, crazy events that come together and form something wild. And also, a lot of the time the history around them is the same. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on GameRanks, 10 video game history facts that'll blow your mind. Starting off at number 10, the plot of Ultima 7 is actually about how Electronic Arts is the root of all evil. The Ultimate games are mostly relevant these days because of the innovations they brought to the RPG genre, but they're otherwise kind of forgotten by modern gamers. I mean, it's understandable. The series has been effectively dead for a very long time now, decades at this point. But you know what's always relevant? Throwing shade at EA, and man, this game spares no prisoners. All the credit for this one goes to this blog called Casual Aggro. Even as someone who knows something about Ultima 7, which is probably dating myself here a bit, but I never noticed any of this stuff. The important thing to keep in mind about Ultima developer Origin is that they love to pepper their games with Easter eggs and little references. They're all over the place, mostly just harmless stuff like using names of people who worked in Origin in the games, but they're also not afraid to go for the jugular. In Ultima 6, where you can find the grave of a certain Captain Hawkins, referencing EA founder Trip Hawkins, which says he died a hard death and he deserved it. If you think that's a little suspect, he's not the only EA employee referenced in the game. A lot of EA devs get name dropped like Joe Ybarra, Stuart Bond, Bing Gordon. I'm basing this off a comment by McClem underneath the Casual Aggro post, by the way. I don't remember this stuff. It's been so long since I've played Ultima in any capacity, it's not even funny. But that's Ultima 6. Ultima 7, they go way hard. To start, the villain of the game, known as the Guardian, is just flat out fully a representation of Electronic Arts. You'll see what I mean in a second. There's also two murderers working for the Guardian in the name named Elizabeth and Abraham, or E and A. On top of that, the Guardian has three objects that give him his power: a cube, a sphere, and a tetrahedron, which, hey, remember EA's logo at the time? Funny thing is, this was all done before Origin was acquired by EA, at least as far as I can tell. Ultima 7 came out the 16th of April, 1992, and Origin was acquired by EA later that year in September. From the information I can find, Ultima 7 was published by Origin Systems, which seems to contradict Ultima creator Richard Garriott's statement that when we joined EA, we already blocked the EA as the root of all evil plots. We completed as planned with blessings. Maybe the deal was already underway at the time, I don't know. But that tweet from Garriott at least proves they were taking shots at EA, like, you can't deny it when you say, oh yeah, we did that fully with their cooperation. It's not the product of some fans' overworked imagination. And number 9 is scratch and sniff discs. If you're an old school PlayStation 1 haver from the UK, maybe this is something you fondly remember, but I did not know this was a thing. You see, I am not from the UK. I'm not sure if there's an interview or any kind of explanation out there, but out of all the games that came out on PlayStation 1, there's 2 that had proprietary scratch and sniff discs. Those games were Gran Turismo 2 and FIFA 2001, neither of which I can figure out why I would want to smell. Check out this picture we found of the Gran Turismo 2 disc case. It's got these big bold letters saying, please rub the disc label of the GT mode gently with your fingertips or a small cloth to experience the authentic pit stop smell. To which I say, what? Why? FIFA 1 ain't so fancy about it. It's just got one line printed directly on the disc. Smell the pitch, scratch and sniff. Which I guess, like, a grass smell could be nice. But I can't figure out why you would do this. I want to know why you would do this, but nobody's gonna tell me why you would do this. Oh my dear bird, the reason why we made scratch and sniff discs is because it still smells like the 1800s here in jolly old England, and well, we wanted to smell Gran Turismo 2. Duh. And number 8, Steve Wozniak, co-founder of Apple, secretly submitted scores to Nintendo Power. Here's a crossover I just I never expected to see. Other than Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak is the other Apple guy. On top of being a pioneer of the personal computer revolution, he's also a Tetris whiz. And according to the man himself, from this Q&A on Gizmodo, he was the #1 top scorer in Tetris through 1988 on these self-submitted leaderboards in Nintendo Power magazine. He was so good that Nintendo told him to stop submitting his name because he was dominating the leaderboard. That's a funny enough story, but old Steve took things a step further and actually submitted his name in secret instead of backing down. He just spelled his name backwards and said it was from the town next over, Saratoga, rather than Los Gatos, and it worked. It all sounds like a tall tale, but people on Reddit looked it up. It's actually true. There it is, Evitz Kazanow from Saratoga, California, with a pretty legit Tetris score. And number 7, you've ever wondered where the name Xbox comes from? Well, you know DirectX? The thing that you're forced to update every time you download a game off Steam? Well, the console first was started as a project by the DirectX team at Microsoft. Quick note, if you don't know what DirectX even is, it's an API that allows for direct access, get it, to computer hardware by bypassing Windows. Basically, it's how games get access to a graphics card when you're using Windows. It's important, and it's made by Microsoft. There were a lot of names for the system early on, like the Windows Entertainment Project, which is way cooler sounding than Xbox. It's not even believable as like a joke, is it? Also, Microsoft Total Gaming, which sounds like breakfast cereal. But the name they kept coming back to was the DirectX box, like DirectX, but in a box. It's pretty obvious in hindsight. Somewhere in an email conversation, they cut the direct part out and the Xbox was born. Apparently, the marketing department actually didn't like the name and assumed that if they focus tested, people would hate it. But as it turns out, people thought it was the best name by far. And number 6, video games used to be made on graph paper. Before PC creation tools became commonplace and easy to use, the art of making video games is a lot more analog. Instead of making worlds using some kind of level editor or engine software, a lot of the time things like levels and game assets had to be carefully drawn by hand by designers and then handed off to programmers to digitize. Like that's how games like Super Mario Bros. 3 were made, by painstakingly drawing them out in exact detail by laying tracing paper over graph paper. The process took forever. Like they were often working morning to night just trying to draw levels. And even when the drawing was done, it could take programmers all day to get to the next level in the game. So if there were any problems, they'd have to start the whole thing over again. And it's a hell of a process. So much of making games was done on paper and crayons back in those. Like, just look at this Zelda design document stuff. There's a reason so many of these games had a rigid grid-based format, because they were made on paper that had a rigid grid, graph paper. And number 5, Final Fantasy XIV's big turnaround can be credited to Excel spreadsheets. The Excel spreadsheet is basically the modern day version of graph paper, and you'd be shocked by how much game designers and developers rely on Excel to make games. Many who worked on Final Fantasy XIV's expensive but ultimately successful turnaround credit that game's success to Excel, but that's just the start of it, because they're still using these spreadsheets extensively, not just to communicate with one another and share ideas, but literally to build encounters and elements from the game. Like, look at this tweet from Perchbird, which shows a spreadsheet that plans out a boss fight from the Shadowbringer expansion. You'd think this sort of thing would be done using engine tools or some kind of special hardware, but no, it is an Excel document, and that's it. Like, it's not anything other than that. This stuff doesn't look like just planning either. It looks like a lot of the hard data that's gonna get programmed into the game, which is pretty nuts. Programming in general is kind of alchemy to me as it is, but stuff like this gives me a newfound respect for the effort developers put into making games. I don't get this. I don't understand it at all. And number 4, most people who worked on GoldenEye 007 had never worked on a game before. So this is a legendary game. It's basically what popularized first-person shooters in an audience outside of the core PC Doom audience. It also innovated the genre pretty heavily, so imagine my surprise when I found out that not only was it mostly made by first-time developers who'd never worked on a game before, but also that like somewhere between 9 and 12 people made it. In an age where hundreds, if not thousands of people are working on a single AAA game, and that's normal. The fact that something that sold so much and is so beloved was only made by a dozen or less people is just nuts. The funny thing about reading developer stories at the time was that for the most part, they just had no idea what they were doing. And they didn't realize what they were making either. They just threw together whatever they thought would be fun, and that's it. Their biggest inspiration wasn't even Doom or any other FPS from the time. Their main inspiration was Virtua Cop, which actually does make some sense because one of the few actually experienced devs on the game had worked on the arcade version of Killer Instinct, so it makes sense that they had arcade games on the brain. From the stories I've seen, the crunch on this game was absolutely crazy. They're working 10 to 12-hour days, 7 days a week for a really long period of time. But it sounds like their enthusiasm for the project was really what kept them going. And I guess that's why the game ended up being unique as hell. The guys weren't just trying to ape games that they were playing at the time, they were trying to do something new. Could have been a disaster too, but this handful of developers managed to make a working game that wasn't just playable, it was legendary and has a major influence on the genre. At number 3, Majora's Mask was made on a bet. This game is a favorite among Legend of Zelda fans for a reason. It's got a unique atmosphere, it's got weird time travel mechanics. The time loop thing hadn't been done in a lot of games at that point, especially not any 3D ones that I can remember, at least no mainstream ones. And originally, the follow-up to Ocarina of Time wasn't meant to be that ambitious. According to an Iwata Asks interview, the original version was just going to be a Master Quest version called Ura Zelda, which would mirror the map and remix the dungeons to be tougher, but that was it. Eiji Aonuma, the creator of Majora's Mask, wanted to make something more ambitious though, so Shigeru Miyamoto challenged him to make a Zelda game within a year, otherwise they just put out the Master Quest game. Aonuma stepped up to the challenge and managed to make the follow-up in less than a year, mostly by reusing assets from the original game. Majora's Mask overall is a smaller game, but what it does differently really does give it a unique feel. The time travel mechanics alone make it one of the most ambitious games in the series, so finding out that it only took a year to make and that it was essentially made on a bet, it makes it even more impressive that the game we actually got ended up being as good as it was. And number 2, how video game screenshots were done before capture tools. I can't understate how easy we have it now compared to capturing footage and taking screenshots from games. It's trivial on the PC now. And also, basically every modern console has features built in like this. But back in the early 80s, getting a clear picture of a game was not an easy thing to do. Most of the time, the only real option you had was to take a picture of the screen, which meant you contended with light exposure, scan lines, fuzzy transfers, you had to use film, you had to take it to the store to get it developed. It was an ordeal, even if you managed to get a good picture. Even with the right tools for the job, it was a lot, and there were lots of problems. Like this picture posted by Kareem2K on r/gaming, which shows the kind of thing people had to do to get pictures of their computer screens. It's basically a giant viewfinder you slapped over the PC monitor to block out all reflections. It's insane. Even with stuff like this though, it really wasn't a certainty you would get a decent picture. Imagine trying to get pictures off something like a Game Boy. For handhelds, they basically had to use special tools like the Wide Boy, which was used to play Game Boy games on the TV before the Super Game Boy for the Super Nintendo was even available. Getting screenshots is as easy as pressing a button now, but in the early days, it required expensive equipment, skill, and patience. And finally, at number 1, where Ecco the Dolphin's name comes from. The Ecco games are some of the weirdest, most out there games of all time, and there's a reason for that. You ever wonder where the name comes from? Well, you're probably aware of the cliches about dolphins, like they're more intelligent than humans. All that came from this dude named John C. Lilly. He's a complete madman who was totally obsessed with communicating with dolphins. So what does that have to do with Ecco? Well, I'm not making this up, but while in a sensory isolation chamber, high on LSD, Lilly says he was contacted by an alien being calling itself the Earth Coincidence Control Office, aka Ecco. That's why Ecco the Dolphin is called that, because some drug-addled lunatic obsessed with dolphins also believed that he was contacted by aliens who ran a bureau that had that as a abbreviation. It's crazy. But at least it kind of explains why aliens show up in the Dolphin game for whatever reason. It also explains why the game's kind of psychedelic in general. There were some real weirdos studying dolphins back in the day. And when I say studying, I don't want to get into exactly what we mean by that word, but let's just say it carries some form of implication. You do not want to know what Margaret Ho Lovett got up to. The dolphin people were gross. At least allegedly pretty gross. Why anyone would decide to make a game based on all that nonsense, I don't know. But it's pretty wild stuff, and at least it kind of explains what the hell is up with the Echo games. And that's all for today. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. Best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription. So click subscribe. Don't forget to enable notifications. And as always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at Falcon the Hero. We'll see you next time right here on Game Ranks.